this is a really exciting time to be a programmer. I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about. You got to cut through the noise of it's taking our jobs. And a part of that is social media's fault because there's sort of like if it bleeds, it leads aspect to
Yes.
social media. Like people just like don't like positivity. So it's like, you post something too positive, it goes to zero. If you post something kind of like catchy and negative, you're like going viral. It's annoying.
Well, hi, Mike. I saw some of your videos the other day, and they've been really fun on your stand-up that you've been doing. One that really struck me as quite interesting was you jumped in and vibe coded a replacement for Loom. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So what ended up happening was Justin and I got the email one day and it was like, hey, your Loom bill was like $192. And I thought, this is terribly expensive for what I use this for. I just I just use it for screen recordings to demo things to people. And so I had thought it's interesting because now that I have Claude on my phone, when I'm sitting around, when I'm with the family, I think I might have even been on the toilet. Who knows? I had this thought. I said, could I build Loom entirely in the browser and just use my local storage and like just not have to and use Dropbox because I had all this cloud storage. And I started just kind of talking back and forth with Claude, and I go, oh, actually, this would work. And they're like, oh, it'll only work in Chrome. And I go, great, because I'm only going to use Chrome. And like, it wouldn't work in like all the browsers. And one of the liberating things about making the replacement was I wasn't trying to build a SaaS product. So I was like, this is just for me. If you want to use it, it'll be free on Git. And then I had that thought of, oh, I could host it on GitHub Pages, which I'm already, so then it would truly be free. And I popped in, I called up Justin. I said, hey, I got a great idea for our podcast. I said, let's just vibe code this right now. And I fired up Claude Code just to show my setup. And I took the plan from Claude. I built a plan. I put it into planning mode again to get like a more refined plan, and then let it go to town, and we vibed out the replacement. And before you know it was working for me. I deployed it to GitHub Pages. It was working for Justin. And I was like, look, just like that, 30 minutes, we replaced Loom and saved our company some money.
So 30 minutes live on your podcast, you built not a full clone of Loom, but enough for the functionality that you want.
That's exactly it. I stress that it's not a full clone because I didn't use a lot of the functionality, like the analytics, the watch, the notifications that someone watched your video, all that. I was just like, I don't care about any of this, like if anything, I don't want to know it because it makes me upset when I send demo videos to customers and they don't view them. Like they like pressure me to deliver something and then they like don't view the demo video for like 4 days. And you're like, are you kidding me? Right. So that I was like, I don't want to know if you watched it or not. I sent it. It's there.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So many times I've had stakeholders push, we've got to have this thing ready for this time. And then you talk to them and I'm too busy to look at it. Thank you. So I think there's two things I'm going to pull out there. One, Anthropic should be talking to you about marketing. You can use Claude on your toilet to build software. That should be in their marketing
That's exactly
message.
Right. And honestly, a lot of it's just crap. Like I just go through some really crappy ideas too, and I'm like, yeah, I'll go back and forth, and I go, that's going to be too technically complicated. I don't want to deal with it. And but I love the idea that I can just be kind of architecting and dreaming, because I was always the kind of person that would write in a notebook like ideas that I had. So, and I just never had the time to get to them. So not only can I kind of explore them more deeply without actually wasting time coding them, but I can also like execute on more of them also, which is really nice.
Cool. I'm curious. So what put you off using Riverside to record the screen recordings though? Because I know you use Riverside for your podcast.
Yeah,
it's actually quite useful screen recordings too.
So it's interesting. Justin and I have a Riverside account, and you have to have two separate ones. In order for the both of us to use it, we have to go enterprise. I didn't realize that it was I'll be honest, I probably didn't even know that it was great for screen recording. at all. Loom, I just started using it one day, and it was free initially, like most SaaS tools are. And then gradually I started using it more and more, and I ended up in the paid tier, and then I needed to provide it to all of my staff, which was where the cost starts going up. And that's probably the bane of the small agency, is the idea that all of these tools are priced per person. And because sometimes I have like 10 staff members, but then sometimes I have one. And like, so, I have a bunch of contractors that go, let me add you to the account so you could put what you need. And you end up paying for ever increasing amounts of people that don't actually work full time at your agency. And I think that SaaS pricing model gets complicated sometimes, but Riverside specifically, there's no option for Justin and I to share an account. Like, we have to share a login or something. It was very complicated.
So I'm going to pull at that. So we've talked about vibe coding this, and I know we both use AI. One of the big things in AI at the moment with using it for coding is a lot of people saying, well, Anthropic or OpenAI or whoever are subsidizing this. They're selling it well below cost. And it's often been quoted that OpenAI are making $1 for every $2.25 they spend. That's not a good business model. So eventually I think they're going to have to put the prices up. When they do, your $20 Claude subscription is going to become higher. So back to what you talked about with small agency, I think one of the blockers of AI becoming quite as widespread as the hype would suggest is that, if you're a Google, a Meta, whatever, that $20, $200 against your salary is nothing. It's well worth it. If you're a smaller business, or you're those enterprises that don't value it as high, view software as a cost center, how do you feel about that $20? How do you feel it would be if it gets to $50, $100, $200, or $1,000? At what point is it too much for an agency?
Yeah, this is an interesting conundrum. And I'll tell you why the conundrum is hard, because I pay the $200 for the Claude Code Max plan. And I stopped using Open Code and went back to Claude Code just because I recognize that I'm getting a subsidized product. And listen, Claude Code is a great product, so I keep using it. And I would easily pay probably 4 times that without thinking at all for the amount of productivity I get out of Claude Code. And that scares me a little bit, because now I go, well, why stop there? Like, if I'm Anthropic, right? I want to get people to pay as close to the max that they'd be willing, that it should feel a little bit painful but valuable, so I know that the screw could turn further, and that definitely worries me. And it's one of the reasons I did get a better computer. So I've got like 128 gigs of RAM. I got the framework, and I'm running Arch Linux. Like, I kind of went very deep into hardware, which I had never done before in my career. I was always a software only person. And now I'm getting way into Linux and hardware, because I think open source is important in this business, because I know that it's going to happen, that these companies will have to make a profit. The tool is so valuable. That's the thing that gets me. And I'm like, man, it's so valuable that you could very easily price someone out. And I made a post the other day that I was thinking about this, like when I hired a roofing company, they show up with the trucks. They got, even a contracting company, they'll show up with, power tools, bobcats, pneumatic nailers. But if I hire like a local handyman, he just comes with a hammer and a drill. Right. And it's fine. Like, I get it takes a little longer for him to do it, but it's far cheaper. It was like a third of the price, but he's not, he doesn't have all the same tools. And I wonder if the dichotomy is going to happen. So a lot of people just assume that hardware will get better and these tools will get cheaper. And I go, but what if it's the other way, where you can hire a hand coder for, like, it'll take a little longer, it'll be a little cheaper, but the machine labor, the better models, these more premium models, are really priced for big companies. They're priced for enterprises. They're priced for even bigger agencies than my own. It's just something I was pondering. I don't have a thought on it, because I could see it kind of going that way, because it does have to get profitable at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I was thinking about it from a different point of view, less from that's a great analogy you've got. I've been thinking about it more from the point of view of, I have primarily worked in small businesses or large enterprises that are, should we say, outside tech, so not the Googles and Metas, the more traditional enterprises. And in small startups outside of Silicon Valley, they're generally underfunded. every single dollar is tight. So getting
Yep.
things bought, getting decent salaries for staff has always been a battle of, yes, I want to pay people a fair wage, but it's not quite easy. Or are we going to make the wage bill this month? Never mind, can I give people a pay rise? And then in the big enterprises, less of that worry, but more case of, you go and say, oh, we want to go and use this SaaS and it's going to cost $5 per user. And somebody pushes back and says, well, we've got 1,000 users and that's every month. So now it's a massive expense. And in both cases, every single dollar gets counted and looked at and unless you can make a good case for the ROI, it's very, very hard to sell. And unless you can keep proving that and get that budget year after year, it's going to be very, very difficult. And again, I think particularly in a lot of those big enterprises, coding is such a small part of what people do that it doesn't have the massive 10x productivity. I mean, I can sit down and I built something in 40 minutes the other day that has taken me 4 weeks in the past. And that's partly because I've done it before, so I know what inputs. It's partly because I can leverage the tools and it's just me building it. I know that in an enterprise that have had to be meetings about that and discussions and stakeholders involved in a kickoff meeting. So that productivity gain wouldn't have been the same in an enterprise because I'd have been doing a very small fraction of coding and a lot of meeting and collaborations. So I do think, again, it's going to be a lot harder for some of these enterprises to justify. I'm already seeing a few moaning about paying $20 a month per developer because they've got 1,000 developers. So that adds up. I think it's going to be quite interesting, as you say, to see that dichotomy between the people and the organizations that leverage it and those that don't.
That's an interesting take too. The idea that the enterprises might be slower to adopt because of the per user cost. And I guess the way you could do it too is that you could do like an API key or have like I've seen this now where OpenAI will have contracts with bigger enterprises for like their whole organization. So they I think that there's going to be a lot more of that as Anthropic and OpenAI and Google sort of they attack the same way that Slack and Teams and Discord, like everybody was kind of jockeying for that, like to get in and offer a good business deal to people to get chat into their business. I think you're going to see the same kind of situation happen with these AI providers where it may not even be the best one that wins. It may be like, hey, in our org, we got a big, everybody's been through this at an enterprise where you're like, well, I'm not really using the best tool, but like this is what got sold to the higher ups. And that could very, very well happen to people where it's like, yeah, well, I got to use Gemini because Google got here first and they're not letting us use Anthropic at work, but I'm using Anthropic at home and it's much better or something like that. So it's there's that world where you're right, the cost could get driven up. There's also the world of the salaries of like you said, like paying the salaries of developers. AI is doing something interesting. I feel like there was a big kind of correction, especially in the United States over the last, I want to say 3 or 4 years post-COVID, as there were lots of layoffs. I've heard about a lot of folks saying, hey, like my salary I'm not able to see these, $200K a year plus $300K a year plus salaries that we saw before. Now Anthropic and OpenAI and all of these folks are coming back on the scene. They're getting a fresh crop of VC capital and the salaries start boosting again, once again, artificially, because they don't need to be profitable. Whereas the businesses you're talking about, enterprises, even just like mid-size, like we know businesses that make anywhere from like 50 to 200 million a year, I'd say here, and have software engineers on staff, but they can't operate they can't pay an engineer not $700,000 a year with like some crazy, package. It's not tenable. The business wouldn't survive. So again, you end up in this situation as a smaller business. I mean, man, I'd love to make $50 million in revenue in a year, right? Like, I don't think that's small, but apparently it is, right? And you're like, when they drive the salaries back up artificially, it kind of makes it much harder for folks to actually employ people at a reasonable level. And I think that we're going to see a lot of this flux again as this fresh batch of VC capital just floods into the market. And again, how do you compete with a business that operates at a loss, that basically just doesn't ever have to make money? It's insane. So it gets hard for us software folks, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. So You talk a little bit about how do we compete, how do we find those people. I think you also posted recently about interviewing in the age of AI, and you had some views on that. So what are those, Mike?
This is something I really wrestled with probably the whole year as I was taking on vibe coding myself, because I do very much still code, and realizing, wow, I had engineers that weren't using these tools and engineers that were, and the productivity was definitely different. Like you could see it, and the customers could start to feel it because even the PMs and stuff, they're like, hey, we've got this project that's like blasting ahead, and we've got this other project it's lagging behind. The customers are you run into the customer complaints. So it started to be like, all right, I know AI is now required. So if you are like completely resistant to this, I wanted to, how do I interview one for, are you using these tools? But then I thought a lot about it. Does this eliminate leak code? Does hand coding go away? Do we not need to do this anymore because of what AI is doing it's sort of becoming the next level of abstraction? And my view kind of has flipped a little bit on this, because I thought the same way about leak code for a long time. And I was always, when I was interviewing, I'd remember it would come time to interview and I'd be so upset because I'd have to bust out cracking the code interview. I got to brush up on all these algorithms. Like I knew this was going to happen. And if you had a job for a year, 2 years, you probably didn't do any of that. You were doing a lot more product engineering, but
Yeah.
the interview wasn't going to be about product engineering, or there was going to be a small portion about that. I still think I still think hand coding, even if you don't hand code a lot at the job, you maybe don't open your IDE very much other than to review code. You're still going to want to hand code, because as a business, the risk is always hiring the wrong person, because this is actually very, very costly. And that was actually very surprising to me. One of the biggest surprises about running my own shop was how costly it is to hire the wrong person for a period of time. Especially as an agency, because now you lose time you can't get back, and like the customer is not going to just give you a free pass. So you basically, the next person you hire to replace that person needs to operate twice as fast, because they need to make up for all the time you lost while you were figuring out that this was not the right hire. So I've come to this conclusion that it is okay to pass on good people, but it's not okay to hire the wrong person. And what that means is I'm actually okay with the false negative. The person who fails the leak code exam and actually would have been a great hire, that's okay, because of the disaster it would be if I got the wrong person. And so I think of the same thing with AI. If I can hire someone that's a dynamite hand coder, this is just a leading indicator that they are going to be amazing with whatever AI tools I put into their hands. It could be the case that someone who's a pretty weak coder actually is an amazing vibe coder. And there could be that person out there. There's probably a lot of people that are going to fall into that camp and are going to be frustrated by what I'm saying right now, just like I was frustrated about having to learn leak code as a non-computer science major. I was so frustrated by this. But you have to get over that. And I had to get over that. I ultimately had to sit down, take a data structures and algorithms course, learn the thing, get good at the thing, get all the nervous jitters out about the interview, because I realized that I didn't want to be the false negative anymore. I wanted to be the positive positive. And for me, the false negative is hiring the person that only vibe codes and can't code, and finding out, you'll find out at some point in the future, I assure you, they're going to hit a problem where you're like, this would have been remedied if you still knew how to hand code. And like you could have gotten the AI over that hump, or you would have architected this better had I quiz read. So I actually think that that's not going anywhere. I think that you're still going to hand code in schools, because schools are still teaching assembly and some of the, you're still learning C. It's just like anything else. You're kind of like learning the history of programming. You're still going to need that time to hand code. And then you're going to jump into AI and you're going to be even more effective. But the interview is still going to involve some degree of hand coding. So you shouldn't let that atrophy.
So what I take from that then is when you interview people, they're going to be hand coding. No AI.
No AI. I think that maybe we'll take it out. I haven't thought it. My interview is a little bit different. I don't do the leak code. I like to just present a real business problem and talk through it. I'm okay with you actually making mistakes in the code not compiling in the interview, which is a little bit different. A lot of people, like, I won't sit there and like make you wrestle through some tiny bug until the thing runs, because I'm trying to get, I figure we got an hour together, maybe an hour and a half, maybe. I don't want to keep people on a 3 hour interview. I know what it's like to have a family and kids and all that. I, if you're making a minor mistake, like, no, I get what you're trying to do. You're doing a for loop. You're doing it's fine. You made a small, it's that, let's keep moving past it. Just talk through what you are trying to do. So even if you were going to use AI for something, just tell me what your prompt generally would be and what you would expect the code output to be. Now, it can't be like way off. Like I don't expect like it to really not run at all. But I'm not going to get us stuck on like, oh, they didn't remember the name of that function. I always tell people, I go, in JavaScript, it's called reduce. In Ruby, it's called inject. If we were like using that, I would forget. I would just tell you like, okay, no, you're looking for this, or you got these two arguments flipped. I'm assuming you would figure that out in the course of your coding. That's not the kind of false negative I want to get through.
So you do some hand coding. What about, do you imagine, or are you using in your interviews any AI to get them to show you how they'd work with AI? So if you've seen they can code, they can do that. Do you have them tackle a task with AI, or do you think that that's already covered in the conversation you've had with them?
It's usually more of in the conversation. I can usually get the feeling, you could tell the people who are really excited about AI and using it and who aren't. Like I don't think people are faking that. And there's definitely no way to, you can just tell, like, they're like, oh, I'll ask, like, what are the AI tools you use? Show me your workflow. That's one of the things I'm asking people, is just show me your workflow, because I'm assuming at this point you have an AI driven workflow that you like. And if your workflow is very like, oh, I go to, or if I'm still using Git Copilot and tab completing, okay, I'm like, you stopped using, you haven't continued to use AI. So I'm looking for like the people who've gone into the agentic workflows at this point. That's where I'm kind of holding to it. It's really the people I don't want to see like a resistance to it. There should be an excitement about it, because this is a really exciting time to be a programmer. I think that there's a lot to be optimistic about. You got to cut through the noise of it's taking our jobs. And a part of that is social media's fault, because there's sort of like if it bleeds, it leads aspect to
Yes.
to social media. Like people just like don't like positivity, so it's like, you post something too positive, it goes to zero. If you post something kind of like catchy and negative, you're like going viral. It's annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. And people like Anthropic have worked that out. If you post a hype post that we're going to make software engineers redundant and destroy that whole, gets that reaction, doesn't it? Gets the engagement, gets them the publicity they want, and everyone talking about them. Interesting. Then you mentioned you can tell who's hyped, who's pro it. I have messages on almost daily basis on my social media with people saying that, why am I so anti it? Why don't I use it? And I have other people saying that I'm too pro it. So what do you think, Mike? You've seen some of my social media. What do you think is my position?
Yeah, I think you have the realist position, which is probably why I follow you. Is you're clearly not like hawking Anthropic products, like this funny thing when I see, I recently saw an interview with Elon Musk, the same kind of concept. Within 10 years, nobody's going to work anymore. I was like, okay, pipe down. Like, it's like, but no, I think you're pro it, because you very clearly use it, but you're also teaching people to code. And I was like, this is exactly the balance we need. You still need to learn to code. You actually should learn to code, and not everything in life. Like if your goal is to like release a product, by all means, vibe code the heck out of the thing. But if your goal is kind of to learn something, it's okay to slow down and just hand code it. Like sometimes I do that too, because I'm trying to learn the thing before I jump into AI with it. When I got back into Ruby on Rails earlier this year, there's this whole new front end framework of Hotwire that I had to wrap my mind around. And like, it wasn't happening with the AI tools. So I had to spend some time making small things with it. So I love your approach of hey, these are some coding problems. You should do this. But it would defeat the purpose of doing your coding course by like building a Lisp interpreter with an AI and just letting it complete it for you. So it's like advent of code. Like you should still be doing these things. And in fact, I built myself a tool that I call Code Dojo that I use every single day. I make sure I hand code every single day because I've always been like, listen, like I'm I am not letting this skill go away. And also I just kind of like it. You know, it's like I said, it's like a puzzle. It's just a fun activity.
Yeah, I think that's probably where some of the resistance to AI comes from, is that some of us got into software engineering because we like coding. And now you're, with AI, going to take away the fun bit, which I get because, you know, I like coding. I like writing code. I've been doing it since I'm 9 years old, and that's quite a long time now. And we've been lucky so far, particularly those of us that have been in the industry for decades, that we've been paid to do our hobby. And now it's,
Yep.
you just want the business outcome. You don't want to pay us to do our hobby anymore. So that kind of great. So I can empathize with the people that are really annoyed with that. Though, like you, I've spent years running my own businesses. So I also have that more pragmatic view of, you know, and this was kind of hammered home to me when I started my business, because when you start a consultancy or an agency, we have that feast or famine, don't you? In that, yes, I could enjoy the purity of building, but if the customer wasn't interested in paying for it, I didn't get to eat. So I had far more pragmatism knocked into me in that, you know, I don't get to build the perfect code how I think it should be. I have to build it good enough that the customer hands over their check and I can pay the mortgage, pay any salaries and pay any contractors, and I can afford food this month. Puts a whole different point of view on where you stand on that. Doesn't it? Really shapes that view. So the other thing I really like that you mentioned there is, you know, that hand coding. And I think for me as well, AI is also a chance to reinforce to people that what works with AI is a lot of the things that have been good practices for decades. So for me, I find it works really well with test-driven development. It works really well by giving it clear requirements at front and a clear spec. Now, I'm not pro big design at front and waterfall. I don't want to go back to that. I remember the pain of that. But equally as much, Agile has been abused over the years to take it from, we don't need to write a 500-page spec up front, so we don't need to write any requirements. So you get a ticket that says, do thing. And that's just, like that's just not yeah, you need that user story and that chance to talk to the customer. But instead, too many companies have turned it into do thing. Oh, and no, you can't talk to the customer until next week. Well, I want to know a bit more about that. So my frustration with a lot of this and the opportunity I see with AI is to remind people that whether or not you're giving this task, do thing, to a senior engineer or to AI, you need to give it more than that. You can't just go along to the AI and say, build me a Loom clone. And I bet you didn't for your vibe coding exercise. You went along and said, I want it to do, and presumably a bit more structure, some kind of specification. Now, you presumably in half an hour didn't give it a 500-page spec of everything that Loom does, but you gave it something more than build Loom. So what was your workflow look like that for that?
Yeah, so this is great. Like I kind of start with a very simple prompt, and this is a perfect example. Claude initially wanted to go like ham with this thing, right? Like it was like, hey, and we can integrate it with a cloud storage, and we could do the like it literally was like it put in the features that I didn't want, and then it did take me knowing things like no, I'm going to store locally, but then it goes, oh, but the drawback of that is Safari doesn't support it, and I go, that's great because I'm never using Safari. Like so that's and I was like, you know, it was like trying to do the cross, it was trying to do the proper thing for a different kind of context. And it definitely it'll overcomplicate. And even in like customer projects, this is a double-edged sword because with this, I know to box it in. Don't do that. Don't do that. And so I'm planning. I'm doing a lot of planning, and then I'm going into planning mode in Claude Code. So even if I'm like using Claude elsewhere, I'm like planning the plan sometimes. And then I even sometimes will add that plan to a doc in the repo. So it's very clear, like when I clear context and stuff, that this is where I'm going. And again, not a big upfront design. I don't think that's the right way to go, but I do try to like I do try to build a little more than I would in a typical agile flow, because here's the thing that's different. When you're coding yourself, you kind of know where you're going. So you're making these like micro decisions as you go based on a little bit of the future. Even though you didn't plan it, your brain is doing that. Claude isn't privy to that. So I do like to do a little bit more where it's like, hey, this is where we're going. Based on that, don't overcomplicate the past features. And it's very easy as a developer. Sometimes like Claude will come up with a thing and you're like, oh, well, the client didn't ask for that, but it's a good idea. And you let it slip in and you're like, I'm going to let it do it because it's just, it's a nice to have. It'll only take like 5 seconds for Claude to code it, the client will love it. But then what ends up happening is that feature is almost what the client wants. And then they're like, oh, can you make a change? Now you have to support this feature. And that feature becomes a part of the future plans. So I find that planning a little bit more ahead than like a traditional, not a total waterfall, lets you start to say, okay, it's a bad idea to let this creep in here because I don't need it for any of the rest of this. So I do a bit more of sometimes I do a bit more of a plan. And then I evolve the plan. So very like after every phase, I go, okay, now we're going to look at step 2 based on what we figured out. So like update step 1 based on all the decisions because I'm steering it as we're going. Now update the next phase here because that's changed. Very agile because your next phase always changes. But I do find that having a little bit more of a plan, just a tiny bit ahead, maybe a couple of steps ahead there, keeps you from letting that feature creep in. That like just those are the tempting ones. Like, ooh, that seems like a good idea. And then you're like, damn, that now I got to support this thing. And once you show it to a customer who's non-technical, of course, they're like, well, now I want that. Of course, I've seen you say, yeah, I want the power windows. Like,
Yeah, I want that and I want some more. And well, you've already done it, so it must be free.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah, feature creep is like a very real thing, and so your product development skills need to level up as an engineer as well. And I think that's a big shift in what the job has become. Also, we used to always have like a 3 specialist model, which is like a product person, a designer, and an engineer. And I feel like that's sort of merging into one role, or at the very least, the product manager and the engineer are merging a little bit more because they're looking for you to kind of make some better product decisions at that level. I just find that that's necessary, and and admittedly, a lot of the product managers I knew were engineers before, and so I think that you're going to see them come back to engineering by way of vibe coding because the demand is sort of saying, hey, this might need to be one role, at least at the smaller companies.
Yeah, which is interesting because particularly at the small companies, or if you did any consultancy or customer work, that's where it was 30 years ago. As a software engineer, your job was to talk to the customer, do requirements analysis, figure out what they wanted, have that involvement, learn about the domain, and do all of that. Coming back to then using AI, you mentioned steering there. I have found that increasingly as I'm refining my workflow, well, it depends what we mean by steering, but I find that I am now, when I have my stuff light, my entire prompting is copy and paste the same prompt in. So I am creating a plan, creating a set of tasks from that plan, and then my prompt generally is read the plan, get the next highest task, check out this document that has kind of key lessons, do the next highest priority task. And then it either works and I check the code and commit it and so on, or it's nearly there, so I do a minor tweak, or it's far off, in which case I revert the code, clear the context, refine my prompt a little bit, and then paste the same, not refine my prompt, refine the requirements document, paste the same prompt in again and have it go. So most of my prompts are basically the same thing. Read this requirement, pick the next task, go again. How are you finding you're spending a lot of time steering, or are you falling to a similar sort of workflow? How's yours similar or different to that?
Yeah, mine's a little bit different. I don't find myself copy pasting as much. My general workflow is I set the repo up myself usually. So like, let's just start with like a greenfield project. I'll usually I'll usually consult with Claude if I'm like researching some different technologies and libraries because it has better knowledge of those things. And I will kind of set those up and install them myself because I find that I just want to get the base done. And then I'll do that Claude code like init command to build the claude.md file. And then I will set any kind of standards manually in there that I want because I find that just getting that out of the way initially is great. Now, this is a big reason why I've moved to Ruby on Rails from my previous stack of like a Next.js and a Node stack. And a lot of people are surprised by that. And I'm like, listen, I built some pretty big Next.js projects. Next.js has no opinions. It's configuration over convention. So I have to tell it how I want it to evolve this code base over time. Ruby on Rails is very different in its convention over configuration. So I have to do a lot less of that. So I find myself just being like Rails new app, bundle install a couple of gems, run some generators, and then init, and it knows and it's ready to rock. And I really enjoy that I enjoy the convention over configuration a lot working in Rails. And there's a ton of code in that ecosystem that the AI has been trained on. And it's also extremely token efficient. So that's another that we can talk a little bit more about that versus like TypeScript, which can get very token inefficient when your type checker blows up and it starts to I really have a hard time steering that. So moving to Rails is one of the first things in that I have to explain a lot less to it. The next piece of that is I'll start the planning phase of a feature. And usually, the biggest thing that it'll try to do is it'll try and build all the models for the whole project first. I don't love working that way where it's like build the whole back end and then like a layer cake like this. I prefer to build these vertical slices. So and usually all I have to tell it is I prefer to work in vertical slices. I need you to break up the phases this way, and it'll start breaking features that way. And then I start reviewing like the plan itself. And then, like you said, I'll let it execute, but I do one phase at a time. And my kind of judge, and this kind of just comes from coding experience, is I never want the phase to be bigger than like a pull request I'd want to review, because it never one-shots it. I don't know about your experience, but I've pretty much find that as soon as I start using the thing that it said it built, I find bugs right away. And I still follow my traditional make it work, make it right, make it fast. So the first thing I do, I don't look at the code at all. I get right in the UI and I start using the thing it said it built. And if there's any bugs, I'm like, fix it, fix it, fix it. And I'll just copy the error message from the browser. There's a new tool called Tidewave that probably makes this a little better now, where it's like right in the browser and I could say error, error. And then I'll get the whole thing working. Now I'm like, okay, it works. Now let me go look at the code. And that's when I start to say, this needs a correction. You're using, one of the bigger things that I find with Rails is it doesn't know it as well as like a React. So sometimes it'll like overuse JavaScript versus the turbo frames. I have some opinions on that. It's gotten better, but those are some of the corrections I'll start to make where I want the code, the models. I'll start to look at that too. Like, do we have extra data fields? Is the data modeling correct? But at that point, I've had a working prototype and I have a working test suite. So it's much easier for me to refactor, just like it would be for myself if I were writing the code. And then again, there's that make it fast part. But again, like sometimes that doesn't come till even later. Like I won't usually address a performance issue unless I have a performance issue. So unless something I'm using is like obscenely slow or there's like something ridiculous that you see in the code, I'll usually kind of keep moving on to the next phase. But from that phase one, I'll then refine my plan for phase two, because I always find things as I'm going very agile. You know what? That wasn't a great idea. I'm moving the UX. Oh, that piece of business rule, you're right. That doesn't make any sense, which will have ramifications. So the next thing I do is now we need to update the next phases based on these new rules we've put together. And then so on and so forth.
So to answer your question about that, I am finding that when I'm having the most success, I can give it my one prompt, which I cut and paste in, which tells it to read the 2 or 3 documents that define the task. And it will build something straight from that one prompt that works and does what I want, or it'll fail. And if it fails, I will try 2 or 3 prompts to course correct, after which, if it's not really getting back on track and in the right way, I will clear the context, revert any changes to the code, and refine that requirement spec, and then go and copy and paste my prompt that tells it to go and read these documents again. I'll do that. Now, each of my tasks are broken down to the level where if I was coding it, I'd expect that I could implement a task in somewhere between about an hour and 4 hours, because that's the way I've always worked, breaking down my tasks into things that I can do in normally in less than a day, ideally less than half a day, because by the time I'm confident I can do something in half a day, I understand it well enough that I can go and do it, and the coding is then the easy part. So I'm doing the same with that, and I'm finding that I can then give those tasks to the AI agent, and a minute or two later it's generated it, and I can test it. As you say, I play around with it, use it. If it's nearly there, I'll give it a minor course correction. If it's way off, try and think about what's wrong and how I can be clear what was asked, and maybe then just roll back and start again. I find that means that it's incredibly efficient for token use. It's also very, very quick to regenerate. Gives me a good set of requirements. It gets me thinking a little bit more about that feedback. Because the iteration is so fast, I don't mind playing with it. I don't mind reverting the code and going again.
It's not yours.
And then again, the changes you get, a lot of them features are somewhere between, a dozen, maybe 100 lines of code. So it's not that painful to review after each of those changes.
That's right. It is true. You get there's the pain of like if it goes and edits like 40 files. Sometimes my like pull request will be that long because I'll do a bunch of stuff in succession. I'll review and commit, and then kind of have because I'll admit I don't necessarily have a code reviewer available all the time. We used to have this code review process where anybody could code review across projects, but we found that it was very difficult. People found it was very difficult to review a project they weren't assigned to. And sometimes in our agency, there's only one person assigned to a project, and that's just the economics of it. So I think of the same flow. I probably, from what you're telling me, I probably have a much looser spec than you have. I definitely hit the high level, very important business rules. And then I let Claude ask me the questions about some of the minutia because it has that question mode. And I've fallen back on that a lot in planning mode because I'm like, oh, well, and I've shown that in my video with my business partner, to Justin. I was like, hey, let it go. And I said, it's probably going to ask me about this, and it will. And I've you start to get a feel. You're like, oh, I got the high level business rules. It's going to ask me about some stuff in between, and I'll make decisions. Sometimes I don't necessarily have an answer on it, and I'm like, but it forces that function ahead of time. But I definitely leverage plan mode a whole lot to build those plans where I haven't really handwritten a big markdown document.
Yeah, I don't use Claude, but I do use an agent to do planning, my own prompt for the planning. So I feed it in those high-level business rules and say, I want to build out a full spec for this. And I prompt it to ask me for questions. So I'm doing very similar there in that I'm putting in that high-level thing and generating the detailed requirements by a question and answer and an iteration with it. And again, after I've got those requirements, I then clear the context and have whole new context start on implementing the tasks.
Also think that it does, you're right, like functionally things usually work in one shot. The things that I end up having to correct is its UX sense. Like when and it's funny because sometimes I don't even know it until I'm using it and I go, nah, that felt like friction. Let's fix that. That's usually the stuff that I have to fix. Is like, I'm like that. I don't love how that looks. That this is weird. Like that, that it'll put things in a sidebar and it'll do it, or it won't follow the designs. That's probably one of the most common things is even if I prompt it in like a Claude MD file, it won't use a shared component. But I'll catch it because I'm like, wait, this uploader looks different than this uploader. Did you duplicate that? And it's like, I did duplicate. And that's the kind of stuff I'm like, no, you should be using the same thing for this. So I usually have to steer in that direction of it works, but it wasn't as clean, or the UX was just, again, it's built by a machine. So I don't expect it to have as good a UX sense as myself.
Yeah, it doesn't have that memory and that understanding. It's yeah. it's not as capable as a human is, but it's surprisingly capable for what it is and incredibly useful.
And it'll allow you to punch above your weight in a design sense. Like for like UX, it's better than like what the average engineer would have produced in the absence of a design. That's what I'll say. Like we've had some engineers where they're like, what, it looks fine. And you're like, I was like, I didn't think I had to say this, but this looks worse than Craigslist. I was like, so we got to figure it out.
Yeah, there's a reason why I do systems engineering and data engineering and stuff, and nothing with a UX, because I suck at it. If you imagine something that like, I don't know, a sleepy 5-year-old did when they were feeling ill as a drawing, that's the kind of UX I do. And UI, yeah, I mean, I'm using any of the AI agents, I can punch way above my weight for building front ends because I am absolutely suck at it. So yeah, it's a great leverage for that.
Amazing. Yeah, I'm the reverse, and I'm finding that like it is helping me delve into back end areas that I just like I was never interested in before, but now I am, and I'm like, and you can learn so much faster. You know, you're getting there and you're like, whoa, I can like really dive into this. Cause I started as a front end engineer and kind of tunneled downward. And so now I'm like, this is really cool. It's allowing me to, again, punch above my weight in the system sense. And now I'm actually by osmosis just learning more about this stuff because I have to. And it is funny because in a lot of like systems and bash style stuff, you end up having to type it yourself because it won't like do passwords or interactive prompts and stuff. So it's you actually end up having to do more yourself, but Claude is there letting you know, like, you're not going to brick your whole machine. This is exactly what this thing does. Like, you're like, okay, I'm gonna learn more about this.
Cool. So with all the good things we said about it and the limitations we talked about, what's your final view, Mike? Is it replacing software engineers? Is it going to amplify the demand for software engineers? Where do you see the field going over the next couple of years?
My bet is it's going to amplify the demand. I think we've already seen this because what's happening now for us is we're seeing so many more people take an interest in software. We're seeing a lot more businesses get into Replit, get into Lovable, build a UI, realize, oh crap, I like this, I want this, I need someone to build this, and for real now. And I think that is incredible. It's like an ultimate sales tool. And then on the legacy businesses, you know, we worked with businesses that did not use CI/CD. Some didn't use version control. We worked with a business that had a stack of laptops in a closet because they couldn't throw them out because they didn't know what was on them if they would ever need it someday. And now suddenly they're like, oh my God, we're going to get surpassed because we don't use AI. And I go, well, before you use AI, you like missed 20 years of software engineering while you were asleep at the wheel over here. So there's this huge interest in getting up to speed with, okay, now we need GitHub, now we need cloud, now we want to get everything set up so that we can actually leverage AI going forward and be competitive. So there is going to be a massive amount of demand. I think that a ton of people, including the big VC funded business people you see talking about how it's replacing software engineers, they're very out of touch with exactly how much legacy software is running at a lot of companies.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing at the moment is a suppressed market with, coming down off the COVID high and the interest rates. When that all irons itself out and we get a bit more stability and cash is a bit cheaper for investors, I think we're going to see a boom. We're going to see businesses going back to wanting to modernize, wanting to leverage these tools, wanting to build more, wanting to catch up on the growth that they feel they've missed for the last few years. And we'll be back to another boom cycle, just like we've had after the .com and just after, like we had after 2008.
That's right. And I think that in terms of like agencies, I'll say for like our business, if you're a gig person or a 1099 worker here in the States, contracting, I think there's going to be a lot of small businesses that can't afford to employ a W-2 full-time software engineer. But you could work for like 10 of these businesses and provide little software solutions like your local construction company or restaurants and places that are going to look to say, hey, there's a lot of SaaS out there. I don't know how to use any of this. It's very complicated. Could you build me a small targeted solution? And you can now do that and maintain it for them and build a nice living out of that. So I think there's going to be a lot more of that niche software, but I think you may not spend, your whole life at that one company. That just may be one of your clients of many that you're building a solution for and maintaining it.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much, Mike. If anyone's interested in getting in touch and learning more about what you do and talking about some of the other things that you've shared, or checking out your stand-up, which is well worth it if they've got half an hour to watch every day, or the podcast that you have, how can people get in touch? And don't worry about sparing the links. We'll put them all in the show notes, but what's the best way and what should they follow?
Sure. Yeah. So LinkedIn, I'm definitely most active on LinkedIn as Michael Rispoli, and then on our YouTube is Strictly From Nowhere. So that is our podcast YouTube channel. We do film every single day. So we have a stand up every single day there. So if you're interested in learning about growing an agency, that is basically the raw, unfiltered, my business partner and I doing a different topic. Sometimes we do a demo like building a loom.com replacement. Other time we just give you the real talk of like we lost a customer and what that feels like and how to get through that. So it's really great if you're building an agency. I think you'll want to check that out. But LinkedIn, Strictly From Nowhere on YouTube, and then I am on x.com also, which is also another way to get in touch with me if you're not on LinkedIn.
All right, awesome. Thank you very much, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely, John. This was wonderful. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Coding Chats. If you did, please like and subscribe. And feel free to check out these other videos on a similar topic.